Hello and most welcome to 1214 of the H series Heidegger. And we were today going to venture into a very interesting article written by João Durão. And this is something I'm going to try to put into the description, because this tilde, as I call them, are very difficult to imitate, but hopefully you can search for the author without using the tilde. They are to show nasalization in the Portuguese language. It's called Embodied Space, and it takes us into an embodiment there everything is reversed. So remember quantum mechanics. It is the observation or the observer that makes the quantum superposition to collapse. But it can equally be said, and this is nota bene very important, can also be said that the collapse, the observation, comes from the outside. Remember here Diego Rapoport, interpenetration is the constructor of borders, definitions and distinctions. And the interpretation means that also the outside work with the inside. Otherwise there wouldn't be an outside nor an inside, as is the case in classical physics, where the body is not working to its optimum anymore. João Durão is showing in a very interesting style how our lack of posture or good posture will change the world for us in a very literal way. Think of the Necker cube. If you are too stiff, the Necker cube will only show itself as a diamond. That's a convex shape, not anymore as the cube, or the opposite. But it will be very hard with a stiff neck to enter into reality where you have this duplicity, the two sides at the same time. Inside, outside, front and back, up and down, they are all dependent on a directionality. And that directionality has previously been hinted by the works of Georgi Buzaki, who showed that the director cells in the brain are incredibly important for directionality in language, understanding, experiences, and all those disjuncts, what we think are disjunct subjects in the ordinary physics, ordinary realm of cognition, what that turns out to be very, very much connected, not at all as disjunct. The body is the thing that connects everything, and the lack of body coordination makes for classical physics, makes for bad health. It introduces autoimmune diseases to the system. It makes for lack of possession, but also lack of ability to handling language. This trend that's been going on for at least a century, where we lose the ability to be exact, specific with the concepts, and all this blur develops, which is modern academia, and this hysterical idea of monosemism, which actually doesn't mean anything. I think the best description of what monosemism is being sloppy with language, not having access to it anymore. And the strictness from the perspective of embodied cognition is no strictness at all. It's just the opposite. It's a lack of persistent meaning a persistent one singular meaning, which is always polyseminal. Always. Because the whole body cannot take one single perspective, or in a good working body it is taking both the convex and the concave side of the neck cube, which is a rather good example of how difference in posture gives another world. And I would say fixed positions, not taking in what we're standing on, which is deemed unnecessary. I got this question once when I was doing, I think, a recording of some sort. Well, it doesn't matter how you stand or what you're standing on. The body is not supposed to be participating in everyday world. The body has become, and this is terror, a piece of flesh, meat, blood, something that a doctor can handle. So, start with a reflection. A reflection is presented on the significance of the role of the body in the interpretation and future creation of spatial living structures. The paper draws on the body as cartography of sensorial meaning that includes vision, touch, smell, hearing, orientation, and movement, to discuss possible relationships with psychological and sociological parameters of sensorial space. The complex dynamics of body space is further explored from the standpoint of perceptual variables such as color, light, materialities, texture, and their connections with design, technology, culture, and symbology. Finally, the paper discusses the integration of knowledge and experimentation in the design of future habitats where body-sensitive frameworks encompass communication, interaction, and cognitive-driven solutions. Introduction. The expansion of space exploration and the prospects for future manned missions to Moon and Mars, with a consequent extension of duration of travel, places an emphasis on habitability issues that encompass the complexity of human behavior and human-centered aspects of space habitat design. In the domain of represented space that is apprehended through perceptual and sensorial mechanisms, mobility is the prime vector and provider of meaning. Our concept is determined by the frontalized progression of the body through space in depth. However, this is not so in microgravity, where bodies inhabit space and time using a more complex scheme and range of movements. This phenomenological awareness is more evident in aerospace architecture, where disorientation and destabilization of the body is accentuated. Through the body, sensorial data and emotional response interact to create symbolic meaning that ultimately impacts the development of new spatial habitats. The creation of such places requires the understanding of the human environment interface and integration of territories that range the psychological, social, ergonomic, anthropologic, perceptual, anthropomorphic, that radiate into interconnected and intradisciplinary fields. Body as a cartography of sensorial meaning. Dwelling is the essence of being in the world, maintains Heidegger. So we are always in relation with things in the world, in a spatial relation characterized by an inconspicuous familiarity, a belongingness, an insidedness, and by sensorial inputs known in the body and by the body that occupies a given place. Being, and by extension living, in a place is therefore possible only in material embodiment. So it is the body that connects things and places, since we are in a place through our own body. Between body and place there is much more than position. There is the data of our experience and expectations. To have a place is also to exist as a sensible body. Kant shows in his 6-page essay of 1768, ultimate ground of the differentiation of regions in space, that the body's role in the emplacement of things in regions provides these things with directionality that would be inexistent if they were considered as merely occupying positions in relation to each other. Hence, without the role of the body, material entities would be unoriented. Without a directionality of left and right, up and down, front and back, these directions taken together describe the 3 dimensions of space, so that in fact the dimensionality of space follows from the directionality of the body. For space to be experienced as place, corporal evidence and experience is required. Body is not separate from the mind, and the way the human being perceives space is interdependent on the physical structure of the body that articulates lived experience. and is articulated by it dynamically. A concept that resonates in both Eastern and Western cultures. If on Earth gravity determines that orientation of our bodies is made along 3 axes, in microgravity the number is increased to at least 6 axes. Top and bottom are perceived in relation to the visual environment of shape, and when one's head is tilted, shapes continue to have the same relationship to their surroundings. Since the mind takes in account changes in body position. However, when top-bottom orientation is changed, then shape perception is more affected than with the tilt of the head or the inverted left-right mirror images. To emphasize this point, one needs only to refer to the spontaneity of the perception of symmetry when it exists about a vertical axis, and is explained by biological adaptation and physiological systems which orient the body vertically. Astronaut Gibson of the Skylab 4 reports the appearance of the environment in space, where perceptual expectations and habits condition the perception of familiarity of space. Quote, "Being upside down in the wardrobe made it look like a different room than what we were used to. When I started to rotate back and go approximately 45 degrees or so off the attitude which we normally call up, the attitude in which we had been trained, there was a very sharp transition in my mind from a room that was sort of familiar to one, which was intimately familiar. It all of a sudden was a room in which we felt very much at home and comfortable with. It wasn't a gradual thing, it was a sharp transition." End of quote. This segment of the report shows that expectations about up and down are not in accordance with orientation and perceptual experience in weightlessness, and encapsulates the essential difference between the effects of gravity that relates not only to the identification or legibility of settings, but also to the sense of familiarity that involves many other dimensions of the body. Familiar things do not look the same when they are upside down. We perceive and expect to see objects oriented in the usual way so that we can categorize them and compare them with what we have stored in our memory. When the world is upside down, visual clues don't match. Objects that are shown upside down are difficult to recognize. Betty Edwards illustrates this difficulty by using the famous photograph of Albert Einstein with her drawing students, and find that by printing the image upside down makes identification more difficult. In weightlessness, an ungrounded three-dimensional space is the result of unfamiliarity, and consequently normal frames of reference are fundamentally disturbed on a very basic level of space readability. Or adopting Kevin Lynch's 1960 terminology, it's legibility, a term that describes the parts of a scene that can be organized in a coherent pattern. Living in space depends on the ability to perceive form, depth, or motion, since our perception assigns coordinates of top, bottom, sides. When the orientation of these coordinate changes, even very familiar shapes can become problematic. Changes in the orientation of a shape will alter our perception of it. For example, orientation can determine if what you see is a square or a diamond. Furthermore, when a three-dimensional object is illuminated by a light source, different parts of its surface reflect different amounts of light depending on the angle of light hitting them. Our visual system assumes that light comes from above and conditions our perception of light and shadow so the crater is concave shaped and dented inward in figure 2, while by inverting the same image on the right hand side of figure 2 as depicted in the brochure, the convex shape is bulging out, a crater turning into a hill. Some space travelers have experienced considerable difficulty in trying to orient themselves in the absence of familiar cues of gravity, showing a clear preference for rooms with a defined up and down. Connors questions whether space travelers are able to acclimate with time or familiarity to a directionless world, concluding that if the need for a directional orientation persists, then not all surfaces in the spacecraft can be made equally usable. And since you don't have the depiction, the crater, the moon crater that changes from hill to a crater is very similar to the Becky cube. A Soyuz 38 cosmonaut reported that the use of Cuban boots reduced the severity of spatial illusions and motor disturbances, phenomena thought to be produced by conditions which also produce motion sickness. These specially designed boots, named after the Cuban cosmonaut Arnaldo Mendez, who tested the prototype, create a pressure of up to 60 TORR to the bottom of the feet, making the cosmonaut feel that he's standing on the ground, and works as a compensatory mechanism to simulate 1G conditions. Tactile experiences also create intimacy and interaction with space and develop a sense of belongingness. The tactile sense and the visual experience are closely interwoven. And as experiments into sensorial deprivation have shown, even though we can temporarily disconnect from sight, sound, odors, tastes, we can never be free from tactile sensation, for we have always the pressure of our body on a surface. Vision and the tactile sense are fundamental for spatial perception. In fact, Plato and Aristotle began by confronting the visual and the tactile to arrive at the differences in their philosophical perspectives. To Plato, vision is the greatest gift to the extent that the universal concepts were accessible to the mind's eye, and the Aristotelian metaphysics approximates vision and the intellect even more. In the Renaissance, the recovering of Greek thought complemented with the invention of representation in perspectives. Put vision in the center of the perceptual realm and on top of the hierarchical system of the senses. With the modern philosophical and scientific thought of the vision of the 17th century, Descartes equated vision and touch, a sense that he believed to be less vulnerable to error than vision. But the latter was still the most universal and noble of senses. As today, Berkeley's theories of vision of 1733 maintained as irrefutable that the cooperation of haptic memory is necessary to the visual body as a whole. Merleau-Ponty, 1962, explores a very ancient image of the importance of touch and brings it to the realm of phenomenology, that all senses are touched in the act of perception. To see stars and the sun is to touch them with the eyes. But for the eyes to see, they also need to be touched by light. Similarly, touch is involved in the other senses. To smell is to touch with the nose, and so forth. Color can link groups of structural components, spatial elements, furnishings, and act as an element of organization that enhances the readability of space and therefore is used for operational and safety purposes to signal, enhance, or identify equipment. As for spatial orientation, a more immediate use consists of identifying the topology of a room through color, providing spatial orientation and direction cues central in weightlessness. A certain color impression not only evokes a momentarily visual sensation, it also involves our entire experience, memory and thought process, and appeals not only to the sense of sight, but by synesthetic association also to other senses such as temperature, hearing, touch, taste and smell. Skylab astronauts reported the need to differentiate colors of small objects to better recognize flying items inside the spacecraft. And that sameness of color was disturbing. In Salyut 6, a color scheme of soft pastels was used to create a comforting atmosphere, and in Salyut 7 these were replaced by a right to left color distinction. Color schemes could be explored with different hues varying in chromatic strength and lightness, combined with the study of simultaneous and successive contrasts. Research of this nature would create the opportunity to explore the aesthetic qualities of color contrasts, as well as their ability to provide spatial orientation. Smell is arguably the most subtle and powerful sense in its potential for emotional impact on very deep memory layers. Smells define our experience of space in unconscious ways and can be used to model architecture. Earlier Indian temples were built from sandalwood. And in Babylon, perfume was added to the mortar and used in temples to lift spiritually. Nowadays, software air handling systems generate smell so that olfactory ambiences vary in response to needs and even discover new ones to expand the existing aromatic palette. When there is withdrawal of simulation or excess of it, sensory deprivation occurs and can be injurious to the human organism, since the brain needs constantly variation of simulation. The lack of natural references, coupled with sensory deprivation, felt over long period, may lead to depression and tension and other symptoms of psychological order. In extreme environments, stimulation on a sensorial level is fundamental for the well-being of the crew. Orientation in terms of time and place is another significant factor for astronauts, and these clues are given by season cycles, weather changes, smell of nature in its multiple variations, all of which are absent. Changing conditions of light during the day and variation Oh, hello. Sorry. Our relationship with spatial settings is by no means confined to the volume occupied by our bodies. Psychological space shrinks and expands. It grows when confined in small spaces and diminishes within vast spaces such as auditoria or cathedrals. Important to take into account as well is that we envisage shape in the mind's eye, which includes the parts that we cannot readily perceive. The human being is distinguished from the other animals by the capacity of reflection and quality of human emotion, and draws meanings from the body and mind, but also from the experience of place in an interactive way. The whole environment influences the perception we have of it, and in turn we also influence the environment in a continuously dynamic interaction. Imagination, flexibility, and self-projection of the body. The requirement of mobility is driving construction to lighter volumes and minimum storage. An interactive environment is the space habitat. In the space habitat opens up possibilities for the environment to adapt to the activities of the astronauts and vice versa. Demanding radical changes to the way space habitats are perceived and designed. Mobile and interchangeable design elements provide variety and multiple function with extrasensorial characteristics that are recognizable in terms of coding and orientation cues. The kinesthetic sense is enhanced by color dynamics and contrast in space and in spatial context, which also applies to flexible arrangements and furnishings that promote movement and social dynamics. Examples of this includes furnishing in aerogel attached to surfaces with Velcro joints, soft rubber and inflated ergonomic restraints for anchorage and circulation, increase in circulation, soft materials, rubber, elastomers, nylons, for protection of the body from edges, round and soft shapes, colors, textures, and materiality according to function and indeed mood. Soft and pliable inflatable structures contrast with hard rectangular structures and have similarities to natural organisms. They appeal to our senses and evoke feelings of harmony and comfort. The same phenomenon takes place with the measures of the Vitruvian body that decide the primary dimensions of architectural space and is proportion according to the noble ratio of the golden section. The Fibonacci series and the number phi that is found in nature. Curvilinear structures and forms are said to produce different subtle energy resonances. And according to ecological designer Victor Papanek, various sensory and subconscious triggers released by such structures flood our minds with a sense of joy and well-being. The flexible curve was used by Kiesler in his endless house. He wanted it to appeal to deep structures of memory, to an umbilical space or womb, so instead of using rectangular, cubical, rectilinear or vertical lines, he used parabolic curves, twisted turns, and spheroid curvatures. Flexibility is a property. There are flexible elements in traditional Japanese house, where there is a fluid interaction between the interior and the exterior. Elements that dissolve, delimitate, or orient in an interior space. Doors and windows are passages that provide communication. A window is also a vehicle of light coming from the exterior, and inside windows connect private and public spaces and have great potential for creating new design concepts. However, doors and windows have other functions that protect from sound or light, and it is in motion that continuously redefine the boundaries between interior and exterior. Objects that are flexible in their structure because they rotate, pivot, slide or fold allow the user to manipulate the design outcomes. Besides providing variety, they economize space and permeate different functions and activities, and therefore flexibility. Since each individual has the desire to communicate and socialize, and simultaneously the desire for privacy, meditation and individuality, flexibility allows for permeable boundaries between the concepts of interior and exterior. Internal spaces are influenced from forces outside of their control, and deterritorialization unifies a shifting interior by internalizing external forces. While maximizing utility by creating multifunctional spaces and offering simulation, choice and control, the body adopts an active posture towards the environment. Raymond Loewy's conquest of a window in the first American space station Skylab proved to be one of the most significant design implementations in terms of psychological response of the crew. According to astronauts with a prolonged stay on space stations, viewing Earth from the window has a very profound significance, because in this process a sensorial connection is made to the place where we all belong, our blue planet. It also serves as a point of reference for measuring relative distance and size, and provides a sense of control down as shown in figure 4. Looking out is an activity that induces self-reflection and self-projection and allows the body to perform ritualistically. The body in displacement and the space of flows. A planetary base on the Moon or Mars is essential for future development and exploration of space. This future habitat is the container of the most complex human and technological activities. So the next technologies and architectural concepts are expected to originate environments that respond to the complexities of the missions. New ways of conceptualizing space and spatial relationships will integrate global, local networks of digital communication that have become the backbone of our organizations, economy, media, political and social interaction. This means that the organization of simultaneity of shared practices can be performed by networks of instant interaction, a space of flows, as Manuel Castells characterizes it. The space of flows result from combining different places between which flows circulate, comprising specific places and transportation, as well as flows of information that constantly circulate in these systems of communication. If to Kant, orientation requires the interpretation of sense of direction that results from a synthesis of the body and the local cues. Deleuze and Guattari point to a new connection between body and space, place, a connection that is specific to being in a smooth place. The result is a form of dwelling that is dissociated from the paradigm of the settled, built-in places. This perceptual map offers a perceptual displacement based on concepts of distance, electronically expanded by radio, telephone, television, video, internet, and new media. Concepts of simultaneity, continuity, and interaction refer to spatial and temporal structures, with mobility as one of the aspects related to space-time. Places are increasingly mobile, and the means of communication makes the world increasingly open and global, so that we can be in various places at the same time. Physically, we are in one place at the time, but we can experience simultaneity of events from a single point in space and time. Human body and human bodybuilding. The knowledge of the environment is based on awareness, experience, and understanding, and in the active creation of meanings, a process bound in space and time. An existence that may be material or imaginary is defined by relationships of object systems and of action with fixed and changeable elements, so that the place as an identity and social construct is based on reciprocity and symbolic interactionism. That is the basis of Norberg Schultz's genius loci. Architecture has always integrated the technological advancements of each civilization in its respective time, reflecting the underlying social structure and philosophy, which is what grounds the genius loci. This will also extend to the architectural conception for space habitats, but requires a conceptual shift from using technology in space to a dynamically flexible technological space that communicates through a body-sensitive framework. An interpersonal communication system based on virtual reality can change the perception of a physical space. This can be achieved by using a skin with LED and LCD panels to transform it entirely and enact a real-time communication habitat. And that enables the entry to a global society. The space station module by Osterhuis, as shown in figure 5, has an interior skin regarded as a flexible membrane with the capacity to be adjusted by the astronauts. Each change is calculated in real time by a computer program that sends fresh data to pneumatic cylinders and orders them to adjust their lengths. The separate panels form an overall image or text where facts and figures are projected through the LCD panels immersed in the flexible skin. The active data-driven structure works like a bundle of muscles that contracts or relaxes according to the instructions of the brain. Communication between the crew and the ship could lead to continuous alterations of settings, moods, and atmospheres. In long-duration spaceflight, sensory deprivation is the main psychological problem, coupled with a feeling of isolation, claustrophobia, and depression. In order to minimize these effects, a cognitive-driven architecture could react to an expert system. Interactively exchanging information between the human body and the building body. For instance, in a spaceship, the absence of external influences such as time, weather, day and night would be reinterpreted and incorporated into the technology of the space habitat. This technology explores the integration of body intuitive interfaces and produces typologies of environments according to the existing needs. Text environment or an image cave with a relaxing or playful environment. We now know that the way we walk through a space has potential to influence the mood of space. But Knox Saltwater Pavilion is the first true bodybuilding to display real-time behavior. It is conceived like a unicellular organism in which the individual bears the information for the body is generated in the weightlessness of digital realm. The pavilion is embedded in an artificial island on Earth and captures raw data from a weather station on a buoy in the sea and transcribes the data into an emotional factor that then translates into changing sound and light from a multicolored fiber optic cables that illuminate the sensorium from behind the polycarbonate skin. These virtual realities or artificial atmospheres revolutionize our perception of reality, expanding and assuming the form of a flow continually variable. The immaterial spaces interpenetrate or overlap, creating graphically visible, perceptible, and sensitive nets as energy flows of the space media or the incorporeal space of art. This recreation and structural force that rises as frontier with the unknown. As a new limit takes us to a kind of space experimentation intimately related to the body and interconnects the body, concepts of reality, and the imagination. Our apprehension of space is based on perceptual and sensorial data. where different systems of science coexist and establishes dialogues following from the verification that bodies relate to matter by acting upon it, but also by being the subject of its action. Body and space constitute dynamic systems that are interrelated in the overarching domains of biological and environmental, and share such terminology that ranges biological features to architectural qualities, as in the case of cellular skin, pneumatic, muscle, brain, skeleton, cavity, membrane, organism. This affiliation with nature is parallel to the adoption of behavior from other bodies and the implementation into another technology, a practice that is not new. The Chinese wanted to make artificial silk 2,000 years ago. And Leonardo da Vinci wanted to fly 400 years earlier. Learning from the behavior solutions of the body, whether the human, that of animals or plants, interest scientists, architects, engineers, and is explored in the field known as bionics and biomimetics. Besides functional implication, symbolic meanings should be considered when dealing with tangible and intangible culture forms of environments that need to create a space for continuous innovation and emotionally spontaneous response, a place to live in. Through the senses, our bodies seek harmony and beauty, and since architecture provokes an emotional reaction that influences our body, space must be designed to allow emotional and aesthetic occupation. In space, behavior is conditioned by differences with Earth on such levels as time cycles, lightning, atmospheric conditions, temperature, sound, notion of distance, smell, texture, enclosure, orientation, all aspects that have an impact on comfort and well-being. The characteristics that are unique to living in space represent the basis for the exploration of new paradigms that, in accordance to spatial environmental factors and mission objectives, and create a challenge for the architects creative imagination to experiment with new concepts of architecture. I would say it's most interesting, this, and it shows that as long as we think our concepts, our abstractions, our understanding, our knowing, our development intellectually, psychologically, mentally, in some way could be wholly or partly separated from the body, we are fooling ourselves. And as was mentioned earlier when it came to languages in previous episode 12, we are not cut out from the world. To have classrooms when there is no movement is almost the same as saying there is no learning possible. This is learning ADHD, OCD, it's learning autism in the whole scale. It's turning people into those lobotomites, which one might call a person claiming to be in Newtonian space. Newtonian space is not wrong. It is just an absurdly simplification and a randomization of space. Because without the body, if we slouch, we turn off 80 to 92% of the neural flow that goes through the spinal column, especially for the last of the cervical. The atlanto-occipital being the most important. It's a sharp cutoff. Westerners are the only ones until recently that slouched profoundly. It is a way of cutting the body out of reality. It is making oneself, trying to make oneself a brain in a vat, or to be like Descartes, trying to feel or experiences absolute psychology or mentality. No written text is enough in itself. There is a tone, there is a posture that gives the meaning to the words. If I'm slouch, it will not give the same effect. It will not mean the same. It will be less. And as Lars has been mentioning fractality before, you are less of a human being in lower fractality. You will understand less. You will be less inclined to have parallel thinking, to have in-depth thinking, knowing where you are, knowing your society, knowing the politics, knowing how to manage your life successfully, as shown by Heidegger. In no exception, all famous and good scientists, businessmen, successful people have an embodiment in reality, and none of those people are ever Newtonianly classically inclined. That is, living in a world with pre-made dimensions, pre-made time and space, and then simply placed there after the fact. No, we have always already been in space. Eintwurft. This is the Heideggerian concept taken to space, and it's just incredible. I think I'll round off there and I'll say have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.